you, Venerable Sangye Khadro, for accepting this invite to teach to ABC online. Venerable is used from 1989 to 2001 was the resident teacher of Mitaba Buddhist Center, and with her guidance during those days, ABC has grown to what we are today. So on behalf of the ESCO and all the volunteers, really like to show appreciation and thanks for Venerable on her guidance and also accepting these teachings during this period when the center is still have no activities at during this COVID period. Venerable is going to give us a series of 12 talks on Lo-jong, to tell us how to be less selfish and less greedy, especially during this COVID period. How can we overcome all the hindrances of things? So hopefully we can learn more from Venerable during this period. Thank you, Venerable. Over to you.
Thank you, Junhao. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to do these talks, these teachings. It's a wonderful topic that we're going to be looking at, and very appropriate, as Junhao said, very appropriate for this period of time with all the difficulties in the world, in society, with the COVID-19 virus and the economic problems, and yeah, lots of problems happening. So this particular teaching is very, very helpful for difficult times. It gives us lots of practical advice on how we can work with problems, with difficult experiences, and actually use them as part of our practice, part of our path to increase wisdom, compassion, loving kindness, and actually get closer to enlightenment, which is our goal. So I thought that it would be nice to start with a little bit of meditation to settle down our minds in case your mind is busy thinking of other things. Good to settle the mind down and get into a good state of mind, a positive state of mind before we start the teaching. So I invite all of you to make yourselves, it's good to sit up with your back straight. Just close all the way or leave them open a little bit so there's some light coming in, and that can help to prevent sleepiness. We don't want to fall asleep when we do meditation. And let your body relax. If there's tension anywhere in your body, see if you can let it go. Let it flow out of you, and you can imagine it sinking down into the earth below or just evaporating in space. So just try to let all tension go out of your body so that your body is light, relaxed, free of tension. And let your mind relax. What that means is let go of any thoughts there might be in your mind that are not related to what we are doing here. So you might be thinking about something that you did earlier today or yesterday or any time in the past. And just let go of or put aside those thoughts for now. And do the same with any thoughts about the future, which can mean plans that you have for what you're going to do after this class, later today, tonight, tomorrow, and so on. So put aside all thoughts of the past and the future, and just let your mind be in the present, right here, right now. Tune into your body, sensations in your body. Become aware of the gentle rhythm of the breathing coming in and going out. And just pay attention to that. Try to keep your mind aware of, attentive to each exhalation and inhalation of each breath, one after the other. And if your mind wanders away from the breath to something else, like a thought about the past or the future or some other place, or maybe a sound that you hear, just gently let go of that other object and bring your mind, your awareness back to your breathing. So do that for a few minutes to settle your mind down in the present, the here and now. Now let's take a few more minutes to generate a positive motivation as our reason for participating in this session, listening to this talk and engaging in the topic. Because the motivation that we have for the things that we do is very important. It's one of the main factors that determines what kind of results or consequences will come from the things that we do. Naturally, we want good results, good consequences for ourselves and others. And in order to have such results, we need to make sure our motivation is a good one. So the very best motivation that we can have is what is called Bodhichitta, or the mind of enlightenment. This means we wish to become enlightened, a Buddha, so that we can help all living beings, help them be free of their suffering and causes of suffering, help them be genuinely happy and have the causes of happiness, help them reach enlightenment as well. So if you're familiar with the Bodhicitta motivation, you know about Bodhicitta, you feel comfortable with it, then you can remember that, bring that into your mind, and think that I'm listening to this talk tonight so that I can reach enlightenment to help all living beings. But if you're not so familiar with the bodhicitta idea, or maybe you're not so comfortable with it, you feel not sure if that's really what you want to do, another possible motivation you could have would be just wanting to benefit others as much as you can in your life. If you can understand that others want to be happy and do not want to suffer just as you do, and you feel the wish to help them, to do as much as you can in your life to bring benefit, peace, and happiness to others, and you would like to learn how to do that, then you could think that that is your reason, your motivation for listening to this talk. You want to learn ways that you can work on yourself, develop yourself, so you can be more beneficial to others. Okay, so you can open your eyes now. We'll do some meditation a little bit later after I talk for a while. So what we're going to be doing starting tonight and for the next about 12 weeks. Well, I'm sorry, I'm saying tonight because I'm in America. I'm in Washington State on the other side of the world, and it's Saturday night, but for you it's Sunday morning. So if I say night, then just understand it's night for me. So starting now, today, and for the next 12 weeks, we're going to be doing this series of talks. And I thought to use as the basis a text which is called the 7-Point Mind Training. Probably some of you have heard teachings on this before. Some of you, it might be the first time. But even if you've heard it before, it doesn't hurt to hear it again. It's a really wonderful, really beautiful text. And this belongs to a tradition which is called, in Tibetan, it's called Lo-jong mind training, training the mind. By mind, what do we even mean by the mind? So each of us has a mind, and the mind is that part of us that thinks, that analyzes, that remembers, has memories, and also the part of us that feels. And Buddhism says mind is very important. In fact, so many people, probably most people in the world, body. We all take care of our bodies. We eat, we sleep, we go to the doctor when we're sick, go to the dentist when we have a problem with our teeth, we go to a barber or hairdresser to make our hair look nice, and so on. So we spend a lot of time and energy taking care of our body, and it is important. But we probably all have times when, even, physically going well in our life, but we may have this feeling inside of us that unhappy and not satisfied. We may feel restless. We may feel like there's something missing, something lacking in life. Have that kind of experience. People do. With me. She invited me to her home for a meal and a talk. And it was Marina Bay, very nice, over the sea, beautiful Parisian furniture house, and because physically, they feel unhappy or dissatisfied. So Buddhism says that in addition to taking care of needs, it's also important to take care of our mind. And as the Dalai Lama, certain types of feelings that are afflictive, that are negative, that are painful by nature. And these come up in our mind without choice. We don't choose to feel them, to have them happen in our mind, but they just pop up. And when they do come up in our mind, and they can become quite strong, quite pervasive in our mind, then our mind becomes unpeaceful, unhappy, disturbed, unsatisfied. So that's when we have these feelings of things not being right. And even beyond that, we can also feel angry. We can feel even kind of wanting to do something violent and aggressive to others and so on. And that is what happens sometimes when our mind gets overwhelmed by these negative, disturbing states of mind. It can come out in our behavior. We might do things that are hurtful to others. We might say things that are hurtful to others. Or we might just give off kind of negative energy to others. And so we might hurt their feelings or just make them uncomfortable so they don't want to be around us. And so we probably all had that experience with other people, you know, when other people are like that, when they're kind of caught up in negative thoughts and negative feelings and giving off this negative energy, we find it very uncomfortable and disturbing, like we don't want to be around them. We want to get away from them. So it's the same thing when that happens to us. When our mind gets caught up in these kind of negative thoughts and feelings, then this is how we come across to others, how others are affected by us. And then on top of that, afterwards, we might feel bad about the way we behave. We might feel ashamed. We might even beat ourselves up mentally. So I hope what I'm saying makes sense and you can recall experiences of this. And this kind of thing happens because we don't know how to manage our mind. Our mind is not tamed. Our mind is not trained. But we can remedy this. It's possible to learn how to manage our mind, how to work on our mind, so that it doesn't get caught up in disturbing negative thoughts and emotions that would spill out in our behavior and create problems for others. And also create problems for ourselves, because when we behave in a negative way, then Buddhism says we're creating karma that will come back at us in the future. So it becomes like this cycle of problems and suffering that keeps going on and on and on and on. So this is the reason why it's important to learn how to train our mind, how to tame our mind. And if we learn how to do this, we'll be able to keep our mind in a positive state more of the time. The more we work on it, the more we practice these methods, the more we will be able to keep our mind positive, feeling happy, feeling kind towards others, careful about how we behave. We do what is helpful to others. We avoid what is harmful for others and so on. And so this is a good thing for others. We're less likely to hurt them, harm them, create problems for them. But it's also good for ourselves because it means we'll be in a good state of mind more of the time. So it's good for others and it's good for ourselves. Okay, so that's why it's useful to learn about mind training. But beyond that, beyond just these kind of immediate results that we will experience and others around us will experience, the real reason, the real purpose of Lo-jong or mind training is how to develop our mind in the direction of enlightenment. Because Buddhism says we all have the potential to become fully enlightened, the state that the Buddha achieved. This is what's called our Buddha nature. So we have within us the potential to become Buddha, just like the Buddha. And so there's all these teachings. This is in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, how to develop the aspiration to become a Buddha, which is what we call bodhicitta, and then how to train our mind on the path to enlightenment. How to become a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is somebody who wishes to become a Buddha and is trained to become a Buddha. So how to become like a bodhisattva and then live like a bodhisattva in our daily life. So that's the real reason or real purpose for learning and practicing Lo-jong. So So there's a number of different mind training texts or Lo-jong texts, and this is one of the earliest ones, one of the first ones that was written. And it was written by, the author is named Geshe Chekawa. And Geshe Chekawa lived about 1,000 years ago, 10th, 11th century in Tibet. And he was originally a follower of the Nyingma tradition. But he also studied under one of the famous disciples of Milarepa, Rinpoche. Rinpoche was one of Milarepa's great disciples. And then one day he came across the text, the 8 verses of thought transformation. I think recently Venerable George gave teachings on this text, so you're probably familiar with it. It's quite a well-known text, very short, just 8 verses of thought training. The author of that is Geshe Tangpa. So Geshe Chekawa came across this text and he was really struck by it. He was really, interested in this text. He was particularly interested in the idea, I forget which verse it's in, but it's where you offer victory to others and you accept the defeat on yourself. I think it's verse 6. So he was really intrigued by that and he wanted to know more about it. So he traveled from his home to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, to seek teachings. And he met a teacher named Geshe Chekawa, who was a disciple of Geshe Tangpa, the author of the 8 verses. And he began studying with Geshe Chekawa, and he studied and practiced under him for about 12 years. And within 6 years, he had attained the Mahayana path of seeing. That's the point at which one attains a direct realization of emptiness and becomes an Arya. So that's a very high achievement along the path. And so he found the teachings of Lo-jong very, very, very beneficial. And up until that time, the Lo-jong teachings were kind of secret. They were not well known. I don't think there were many texts about them and they weren't taught very openly. But because Geshe Chekawa found them so beneficial, in fact, at one point he taught Lo-jong to some people who suffered from leprosy, lepers. And some of these people, by practicing Lo-jong, and particularly the practice of tonglen, taking and giving, they did that practice, and they were actually cured of their leprosy. And yeah, so he thought, wow, these teachings are so helpful, then it would be good to make them more widely available. And so that is why he wrote this text. He wrote down these teachings that had formerly been kind of secret and just passed from teacher to disciple. He wrote them down in this text. So that's the text that we're going to look at, the 7-point mind training. And there's a number of different versions of this text. I guess because it was written about 1,000 years ago. And so over that time, you know, there were possibilities of maybe some changes happening in it. So I've chosen a version of the text that is contained in, I'll show you this book. It's called Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun. This is actually a commentary to the 7-point mind training. Some of you may have a copy of this. It's printed by the Tibetan Library of Dharamsala. So I'm going to use this as the basis for these talks. And within this text, there is a version of the 7-point mind training text. So I've made that available to you. I think you should be able to download it or get copies of it somehow. Does everyone have a copy? So if not, I think you can get copies later.
We have uploaded a copy of the text. The link is in the Zoom chat if anybody would like to download a copy. Yep.
Okay, so at the very beginning of the text, it says, homage to great compassion. So here, Geshe Chekawa, the author, is expressing praise or admiration to this quality of great compassion. So compassion itself is when we feel concerned for those who are suffering and want them to be free of suffering. And great compassion goes beyond just wanting others to be free of suffering, but it takes on the sense of responsibility. It says, I will do something about that. I will do what needs to be done to make sure that sentient beings are free of suffering. So you take on a sense of personal responsibility. So this is what a bodhisattva generates, someone who aspires for enlightenment. And they don't just wish others to be free of suffering and hope that somebody else would do it, will take care of them, but they say, I will do it. Okay, so bodhisattvas are very, very courageous and very committed to helping others, and they take on themselves this job, this responsibility to help others. So great compassion is essential quality to develop if we want to follow the Mahayana path and succeed in reaching the state of enlightenment or Buddhahood. And then he says, the essence of this nectar of secret instruction is transmitted from the master from Sumatra. So that's in your neighborhood, not far from Singapore. This is referring to Serlingpa. He has a number of different names, but he was a great master who lived in Sumatra. And Lama Atisha, you've probably heard of Lama Atisha. He was an Indian master, a great scholar and practitioner in India. And he studied under many different teachers in India. But then he heard about this master in Sumatra and went there to study under him. I think he stayed for about 12 years studying with Lama Serlingpa. And it was mainly from this Lama that he learned how to generate bodhicitta. He learned the method for generating bodhicitta, and he was able to generate that state of mind. So, so he had great devotion, great respect for that Lama. And then later in his life, Lama Atisha went to Tibet, and he was very instrumental in the development of Buddhism in Tibet. He was there, I think it was about the 10th century in Tibet. So Lama Atisha learned about the Lo-jong teachings from his teacher, Master Serlingpa in Sumatra, and then he brought them into Tibet. and passed them on to his disciples. And they eventually came to Geshe Chekawa, who wrote this text. So Geshe Chekawa is just, expressing his respect and his appreciation for this teacher from Sumatra. Then he says, you should understand, you should understand the significance of this instruction as like a diamond, the sun, and a medicinal tree. So he's comparing the teachings of Lo-jong to these three phenomena. The first one is a diamond. So a diamond is probably the most precious of all jewels. It's very, very valuable. And even a small piece of a diamond, or a very, very small diamond, is very valuable. And if you happen to acquire it, then it can relieve you from poverty. So if you're somebody who's very poor and you happen to acquire a diamond, then that will enable you to free yourself from poverty. So in a similar way, the Lo-jong teachings can free us from our suffering. And even if we don't know all of them, even if we can't practice all the Lo-jong teachings, but practice a small part of them, will enable us to be free of the poverty of cyclic existence. So cyclic existence, or samsara, refers to the situation that we are in as unenlightened beings. As long as we're not enlightened beings, then we experience lots of sufferings and problems. We die, we're reborn, and in each life we experience sickness and aging and not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, and so on. So all kinds of problems happen as long as we are in samsara. So it's kind of an impoverished state of existence, because we actually have this richness inside of us. Our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential is right there inside of us. But most people are not aware of it and don't know how to develop it. But if we do become aware of our Buddha nature and put energy into cultivating and practicing it, then we can attain this amazing state of Buddhahood, enlightenment. So the Lo-jong teachings are like a diamond, in that they enable us to emerge from this impoverished situation that we are in, being in samsara, and to reach this wonderful, wealthy, not materially, but spiritually wealthy state of Buddhahood, enlightenment. So in other words, they're very, very precious. And then the second analogy is sun. So the sun shines very powerful, brilliant rays of light, and wherever those light rays reach, become illuminated and free of darkness. So that's the function of the sun, is to eliminate darkness. And in a similar way, the Lo-jong teachings eliminate the darkness in our mind, the darkness of ignorance, where we're just in the dark. We don't know how things exist. We don't see things correctly. We don't see the true nature of things. So ignorance is compared to darkness. And within this state of ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things, we also cultivate lots of other mental afflictions, like self-centeredness. We're very attached to ourself, our ego. We have a big sense of ego and pride, and anger and attachment, and all kinds of other disturbing emotions. So all of that happens because of being in darkness, the darkness of ignorance. So the Lo-jong teachings are like a bright sun that illuminate our minds and enable us to be free of all this darkness. And the third analogy is a medicinal tree. So a medicinal tree, or plant, we could say, has healing properties. And it's said that a medicinal tree, every part of it, the trunk, the bark, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, all the parts of this medicinal tree are able to heal illnesses. So even one part of a tree is able to have those kind of properties of healing illness. So in a similar way, the Lo-jong teachings can heal the illness of our mental afflictions, our suffering, and so forth, and bring us to a state of genuine peace and happiness, mental health, mental well-being. And then he goes on to say, this time of the 5 degenerations will then be transformed into the path to the fully awakened state. Okay, so the 5 degenerations, this is 5 kind of qualities, bad qualities of the present time that we are in. So the 5 are, first of all, time, the degeneration of time. And what this means is people's interest in spirituality has declined. People are less interested in Dharma, spiritual teaching, spiritual practice. They're much more interested in making money and acquiring wealth and material things, and just themselves, experiencing sense pleasures and so forth. And I was thinking, in the past, in past centuries, the largest buildings that one would see in a town or in the countryside would probably be religious buildings, like temples, monasteries, shrines, pagodas, and in the West, churches, cathedrals. So they would be like really enormous, high buildings. But nowadays, like think about the Singapore skyline, the largest buildings are banks devoted to making money and so on. I mean, some temples are still quite big, but not as big as the banks. And then, other businesses and hotels and so on and so forth, which are much more dedicated to just, the pleasure, the benefit of just this life alone, and don't really help us develop our spiritual qualities to higher states, and also don't really help us for future lives. So that's just a sign of how things have changed compared to the past. So yeah, it's sad that in the past, people were much more spiritual, much more interested in spiritual practice, more people were meditating, and they also achieved realizations, like when you read the life of the Buddha, people that the Buddha met, and they would meet him and just listen to his teachings, and very quickly would gain realizations, would gain the realization of emptiness, the true nature of things, sometimes, very quickly attain nirvana. So people's minds were more ripe and ready. Nowadays, it's much more difficult for us to develop our spiritual qualities. It's not impossible, I don't want to discourage you, but more difficult. So that's it to be, just this time that we are in, less spiritual energy, spiritual possibilities. The second one is degeneration of beings. So people, it said now in these times, people are less happy, less peaceful. They have more disturbing thoughts and emotions in their mind. And you can see that as well. There's a lot of mental illnesses that people suffer from, depression. And I don't know, there's hundreds of different kinds of mental illnesses, mental problems that people have. And what I've heard is they're on the rise. And also in younger and younger people, even in teenagers, children, and so forth. And suicide also is increasing. So that shows that people's minds are less happy and peaceful. And materialists, that people are more materialistic, more greedy, and corrupt, a lot of corruption and cruelty as well. Just extraordinary when you read about some of the stories of what people do to other people or animals and so forth. And then the third is views. Nowadays, people have less realistic views, they're less in touch with reality. They have more kind of confused and deluded views about themselves, about the world, about everything. And number 4 is delusions or mental afflictions. So these are stronger, more prevalent now than in past times. So, you know, these things aren't meant to make us discouraged. It's just to explain. Well, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that there are so many problems in the world, because according to Buddhism, these are the characteristics of the age that we are in now. And it's not just now, like in the 21st century, but even back at the time of the Buddha. In fact, it's said that Shakyamuni Buddha, out of his great compassion, his great love, his great concern to help sentient beings, he deliberately chose to come into the world at such a time. Even at his time, you know, things were bad compared to previous times. And then degeneration of lifespan. Well, in some ways we might say, well, lifespan seems to be getting longer. Life expectancy is longer now than it was a few centuries ago, or even 2 centuries. But Buddhism talks about, you know, a much bigger span of time. And they do say that there are times when human lifespan is much, much longer, even thousands of years. So comparatively, relatively, the lifespan is shorter now than it was at other times. So anyway, the point here is that the time that we are living in this world, is full of these problems, these 5 degenerations. And these teachings of the Lo-jong are particularly helpful in such times, because they contain many methods that we can use to utilize problems, utilize these difficulties in our world, in our mind, and actually make them part of our spiritual path. They talk about transforming adverse circumstances into the path, into the spiritual path, and that enable us to get closer to enlightenment. So we will learn those methods later. But yeah, so they're very, very precious, these methods, these teachings. And yeah, I hope that hearing about these degenerations doesn't make you feel discouraged or depressed or anything. But the point is, yeah, we can practice. Even in these difficult times, we can practice. And it's sometimes said too that if we keep precepts, like even just one precept, like the precept to not kill, that's the first precept we take. You know, when we follow the Buddhist path, we take refuge in precepts. So the first one is to abandon killing. So we make that promise or that commitment that we will not kill as much as we can, human beings, but even animals, insects. So we really try our best. Sometimes it's difficult when you got lots and lots of ants in your house. I know what it's like in Singapore. Tons of ants and cockroaches. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to avoid killing, but at least to have this make a conscious effort to not kill, to try to clean your house in such a way that you can avoid killing. So just to make that effort to live our life in such a way that we don't kill or harm other beings in any way is so powerful. And they say that, you know, even just keeping one precept during these times where things are so degenerate and so difficult is much more beneficial than keeping lots of precepts or doing lots of other kinds of practices at another time when conditions are better. So any effort that we do make to engage in studying and practicing Dharma during these times is very, very, very powerful, very beneficial. Okay, so this is called a 7-point mind training. And the first of the 7 points is training in the preliminaries. So actually, Lo-jong, mind training, is kind of an advanced practice. It's not really something you would teach to brand new beginners who are just, you know, learning about Buddhism and starting out on their practice. It's kind of more advanced. So it's important to learn some of the more basic teachings and contemplate them and practice them. So that's the importance here of the preliminaries. These are preliminary practices to train ourselves to be able to do the Lo-jong, the thought training teachings. So there are 4 preliminaries mentioned in the text. The first one is what we normally call the precious human rebirth. So what this basically means is looking at the life that we have and recognizing that we have many excellent qualities. We're free of certain obstacles that would make it hard for us to practice the Dharma. And we have these other, what are called fortunes or leisures or opportunities that make our life ideal, perfect for engaging in spiritual practice. And then the second of the preliminaries is impermanence and death. And the third is karma, the law of cause and effect. And the fourth is the unsatisfactory nature of samsara or cyclic existence. So we can't just skip over these and jump into bodhicitta and be able to develop bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, and do thought training practices if we haven't spent some time contemplating. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these, but just in case there are some people who are new to these teachings, I'll spend a bit of time talking about these 4 preliminaries, and we'll do some meditation on them as well, because that's the real purpose. It's not just to read about them and hear about them, but to contemplate them, because they bring about a transformation of our mind. So the first one is, again, the precious human rebirth, or the perfect human rebirth. And when the Buddha was alive, he once was with some of his disciples, and he said to them, imagine if the whole world is covered with water, like one great big ocean. And living at the bottom of the ocean is a tortoise or a turtle. And the turtle is blind, so it can't see. Once every 100 years, the turtle gets to go up to the surface of the water and stick its head above the water, just for a short time. And then it goes back down to the bottom of the ocean. And on the surface of the ocean is a golden yoke, like, the lifesavers they have on boats, on ships, in case the ship goes down, then people can use the lifesavers to save themselves. So, like a ring made of gold. And that's floating around on the surface of the ocean. It's always in different places. It's never in the same place. It's floating here and there with the wind and the tide, the waves, and so on. So the Buddha asked his disciples to imagine this scenario. And then he asked them, so when the turtle comes to the surface of the ocean and sticks its head above the water, how likely is it that it will be able to stick its head through that golden yoke? Remember, it's blind, so it can't even see. And the yoke is always in a different place. So the disciples said, oh, very unlikely. And the Buddha said, yeah. And in a similar way, it's very difficult to be born as a human being, to have a human life. And it's very difficult to meet the teachings, the Dharma, the teachings that show us the path to enlightenment. So now you have both of these. Don't waste your time. So the basic idea is we're human beings now, but we haven't always been human beings. Buddhism says we've had many, many lives before this one, and we'll probably have many lives after this one. So this is just one life in a series of many, many lives. And we're not always human beings as we go from life to life. There are different forms of life, such as animals and other things like hungry ghosts. There's also hell in Buddhism. There's also higher realms, very wonderful, blissful realms like heaven, in theistic religions, much better than this world, much more pleasurable, longer life, less suffering. But the thing is, we cycle through these different realms each lifetime. You know, we end one life, we die, our mind or consciousness leaves this body and goes to another one. And where we go isn't a question of choice. We don't get to choose where we're born, but it's our karma. Whatever karma is strongest at the end of our life, that will be the one that throws us into the next life. So if a good karma comes up, then we could be born as a human being or as a deva, a god in one of the heavenly realms. But if a bad karma comes up, we could be born in one of the unfortunate realms as an animal or a hungry ghost or in hell. So according to Buddhism, we've had many, many lifetimes, and we've been in all these different realms. We go up and down and around, kind of like on a Ferris wheel. But of all these different realms, the human realm is the best one for spiritual practice, because in the unfortunate realms like animal and so on, there's so much suffering, much more deprivation than we have in our world, believe it or not. However many people we have here, things are much worse in those realms. And so here we're relatively well off, relatively comfortable, free of suffering. Excuse me. And then in the heavenly realms, the Deva realms, they have a lot of pleasure, but it's too much, too much pleasure, such that they just get totally distracted, totally, you know, caught up in enjoying themselves, just day and night. And no interest at all in doing anything worthwhile, doing any spiritual practice, Dharma practice. So we're kind of right in the middle between those two situations, the terrible sufferings of the lower realms and the excessive pleasure of the higher realms. So here we have a certain amount of suffering. We have some suffering. So we know, oh, I don't like that. And I want to be free of that. I want to get out of suffering. But we don't have too much, such that we're, you know, just totally paralyzed by suffering. And we have a certain amount of pleasure, so we know what pleasure is like, and we feel like, yeah, I want more of that. I want more happiness. So it's kind of just the right situation, the right set of conditions or experiences to be able to understand the Dharma the Buddha taught, which is basically about how to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, and how to achieve genuine peace and happiness. Not just, you know, the kind of happiness we experience here and now in this world, but genuine happiness, the happiness of developing single-pointed concentration, developing the wisdom that sees the true nature of things, and then higher happiness, nirvana, and eventually enlightenment. So we have the ability to achieve these amazing states of peace and happiness. And this human life that we have is the perfect situation in which we can do that. So we're fortunate to be born as a human being. And there are other conditions in our life as well that make it an ideal situation. For example, there's the availability of the teachings. Okay, so they say there are certain times and certain places where there are no teachings. There's no teachings of the Dharma that explain how to develop our mind and how to reach higher states like liberation and enlightenment. So that's not the case in this world, because the Buddha came into this world 2,500 years ago, and he taught. He spent something like 45 years teaching, and his teachings were practiced by many people, and then they handed them down to successive generations, and so those teachings are still alive today. They're available. There are people learning them and teaching them, practicing them. So we have the chance to meet these teachings and practice them. And there's people who are willing to help us and support us as we are practicing. So we have just the ideal circumstances to be able to learn and practice the Buddha's teachings. So the precious human rebirth is actually defined in terms of what are called 18 conditions, 8 freedoms and 10 endowments or fortunes. I'm not going to go through all of those in detail. If you're really interested, you can look them up. But I'm just summarizing them. Okay, so the essence of the precious human rebirth is having a human life, a healthy body, a healthy mind, healthy brain, and the ability, the opportunity to meet the Buddha's teachings and to put these teachings into practice. So that's what the Buddha was talking about when he gave that analogy to his disciples. You have this ideal situation, human life, human mind, human intelligence, and you have the chance to learn these teachings, the Dharma, with which you can free yourself from all suffering and the causes of suffering and attain this incredible peace of nirvana and enlightenment. So don't waste your time, because this human life doesn't last forever, as we know. Probably the maximum amount. I mean, there's a few people who live to be about 115, 116, 117, maybe 120, but that's like the maximum. Most people, you know, only live into their 80s or 90s. So we have a limited amount of time in this life with this set of conditions. And when it does come to an end, when our life ends, we die, it's not definite that next time, next life will be another one like this. It's actually said to be rare to be born as, to have a precious human life, as the Buddha illustrated in that story about the tortoise or turtle and the golden ring. He said it's actually quite rare to have a human life with all these conditions. Another way to understand how it is rare is just in terms of numbers. We can count the number of human beings in this world. It's somewhere, I don't know, it's more than 7 billion now, getting close to 8 billion, which sounds like a lot. But when it comes to the animals, because animals includes like the mammals and birds and fish, reptiles, insects. So there's so many of those, it would be impossible to count them. You know, especially fish and insects. There's just zillions, uncountable number of those. So there's far more animals than there are human beings. And then it said we can't see the other realms, like the hungry ghost realm, the hell realm, but it said that there are even more beings in those realms than there are animals. So there's far more openings, you might say, vacancies, opportunities to be born in the unfortunate realms than there are in opportunities to be born in the human realm. And also it depends on causes. What are the causes to be born as a human being? It's mainly ethics, ethical conduct, such as refraining from the 10 non-virtuous actions, not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, and not telling lies, not speaking harsh words, not speaking divisive words or idle talk. And then the 3 of the mind, covetousness, refraining from covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. So that's the basic practice of ethics, is to refrain from those as much as possible and do purification if we do happen to do any of those. And then on top of that, if you want to take precepts, such as the lay precepts, the 5 lay precepts, or the precepts of monks and nuns, and that's additional practices of ethical conduct. But that's the main cause, to have a human body, a human life, human rebirth. So how many people in the world are doing this? How many people are really taking care of their ethical behavior? A lot of people are not. Very careless about what they do and engaging in all kinds of non-virtuous actions, especially lying. There's so much of that going on here in America these days, and then getting away with it. Yeah, so yeah. But we have to look at ourselves as well. Are we practicing ethics? How good is our ethics? Because if we want to have a human rebirth in our next life, that's the main thing we need to do, is live ethically. And other practices as well, such as generosity, being generous and not stingy, and being patient and kind and loving. So we need to engage in positive, virtuous actions in this lifetime if we want to have a human birth in the next time around. But yeah, so looking at what people are doing, what most people in the world are doing, we might find that they're not necessarily creating causes for a human rebirth. So the point is, it's rare, it's difficult to get, it's precious, and while we have it, we should not waste it, but make good use of it. What does it mean to make good use of a precious human life? There's 3 levels of that. One is, this is kind of the bottom line, you know, the first thing we should strive for is to ensure that when this life ends and our mind, our consciousness goes to the next life, that we will go to a good life. We will take a good rebirth and not end up in some unfortunate realm. So that means, again, as I said, we have to make sure we keep good ethics, practice ethical conduct, and other practices, create merit, virtue, refrain from non-virtue, practice, in fact, it said, practice all 6 perfections as much as we can. The 6 perfections are the main practices a bodhisattva engages in. So they are ethics, so giving is the first one, ethics, and then patience, and then joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. So as much as we can, especially ethics, we need to engage in those practices if we wish to have a fortunate rebirth in our next life. So that's the, you know, the first thing, the main thing we need to strive for and use our precious human life for. And on top of that, we can use our life to achieve the higher goals, the highest goals possible, which are nirvana, state of complete liberation, complete peace, freedom from samsara, having to die and take rebirth again and again, and enlightenment, full enlightenment or Buddhahood. So again, we're so fortunate that we have the opportunity to learn these teachings that the Buddha gave, showing, you know, how he did it, how he brought himself from an unenlightened state to the state of enlightenment. And we have a chance to learn these teachings and at least start to practice them, even if we can't achieve the goals in this lifetime, but at least we can start working in those directions, liberation and enlightenment. And it's also said that each moment of our human life, our precious human life, is precious, because even in just one moment or one very short period of time, we can create a lot of merit, a lot of virtue, a lot of good karma that will be the cause for these goals, like good rebirth, liberation, and enlightenment. And one of the best ways to do that is to do things with the Bodhichitta motivation, the motivation of Bodhichitta. So for example, looking at a statue of the Buddha or an image of the Buddha and just feeling respect, faith, devotion, you know, how wonderful the Buddha is, and maybe bowing to the Buddha, or even just putting our hands together like this, you know, as a way of showing respect to the Buddha. And or making offerings, you know, even offering a candle, stick of incense, a flower, making offering to the Buddha. And if we do it with the motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha ourselves, you know, to emulate the Buddha, achieve what he achieved, so that we can help all living beings, then that just in that very short amount of time, we are creating a huge amount of merit, a huge amount of good karma, and that becomes a cause for our attainment of enlightenment. So that's the idea, that just in a short period of time, you don't need a long gap of time, you know, sitting there for hours and hours and hours meditating. Of course, that's good too, but even in, you know, a very short amount of time, just a few seconds, a few minutes, we can create a vast amount of merit or good karma. And so again, this life we have is very, very precious. So I thought it would be nice if we just do a little bit of meditation on this idea and try to bring it deeper into our mind, get a deeper experience of it. And then I'll stop and answer questions if you have any. So once again, try to sit up straight. Let your body relax. You can close your eyes if you wish, or leave them open a little bit. Bring your awareness into your body. Be aware of your breath coming in, going out. Put aside any other thoughts that might have crept into your mind, any thoughts not related to the meditation we're about to do. So put those aside for now and just focus on the meditation. So, according to Buddhism, every living being, including ourselves and everyone else, has the potential to become fully enlightened, just like the Buddha, a state of mind that's totally free of all unhappy, negative, disturbing thoughts and emotions, such that they will never arise again. And the state of mind full of all positive qualities like compassion, love, wisdom, generosity, patience, joy, courage. All the positive qualities fully developed and always present. It's like the most perfect state of mind that can exist. The state of mind the Buddha achieved. So we can achieve it too. Our mind has the potential to achieve that state. And the Buddha taught how to do it. That's what his teachings, the Dharma, are all about. How to bring about this transformation of our mind, actualizing our potential for enlightenment. So even though every living being has this potential, not every living being is in the most ideal conditions to be able to know about the potential they have inside and learn how to get in touch with it and actualize it. Some beings are in a situation where there's just so much suffering, physical suffering, mental suffering, both physical and mental, a lot of confusion, a lot of disturbing thoughts and emotions. There's just no chance for them to be able to learn about the potential they have. Other beings are intoxicated with pleasure. They have wonderful lives, wonderful enjoyments, and they're just completely caught up in just enjoying themselves. So even if they met someone like the Buddha or a spiritual teacher who taught them about the Dharma, they wouldn't be interested. They're just having too much fun. So we're in the middle between those two extremes. We have a certain amount of suffering, problems, difficulties that induce a feeling of wanting to find a way out, wanting to be free of problems and suffering. And we have a certain amount of pleasure, so we know what that's like, and we want more of that. And we have an intelligent mind that is able to understand what is true and what is false, what is right, what is wrong, what is helpful, what is harmful. So this situation is perfect, is ideal to be able to appreciate the Buddha's teachings, to understand them, and to feel a wish, an aspiration to study, to learn, to practice these teachings and follow this path that the Buddha taught. So the Buddha said this situation is quite rare. Not everybody has it. In fact, only a small minority of all living beings have such a situation, and we have it. So we're very, very fortunate. But it won't last forever. So we have a limited amount of time to use our life to learn and practice the teachings. So it's important that we at least start. We may not be able to practice all day long, but at least do some practice each day. Spend some of our time each day, increasing our knowledge, our understanding, and our practice, putting into practice the teachings that the Buddha taught so that we can get closer to liberation from suffering and to full enlightenment, Buddhahood, so we can help others to do the same. So see if you can come to that conclusion after hearing about and contemplating these points, that you'd really like to use your life in ways that are positive and beneficial and meaningful for yourself and others, especially in terms of following the spiritual path, the Dharma. Okay, so when you feel ready to come out of the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes. So I'll stop there, and we have some time left if anyone would like to ask a question. So, Chun, how
Okay,
do you explain how
yeah.
to do that?
Okay, for those who want to ask your question, any question, please raise your hands. We will unmute you and you can turn on your mic and your video so they can ask the question. To raise your hand is at the right hand of the corner of the Zoom. There's 3 dots. You press the 3 dots. You press the 3 dots and then, okay, Barbara, okay, let me unmute you first. Okay, you can turn on your mic. You can ask your question, Barbara.
Yes, I would like to buy the mind training book, and I cannot find it at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. Can you give us any direction where we go on the site to do that?
So you're talking about this book about mind training like the rays of the sun? You're looking for that?
Yes.
And you're looking on the website of the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives?
Yes.
I don't know, because I just had there's a copy here in the library. So I didn't have to go to their website. Huh?
Someone in the comments had said that, oh, I see, it's at Amazon. Okay. Works for me.
Okay, good.
Anyone else? Okay, Kit, just hold on. Okay, Kit, you can unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Hi, Venerable. Sorry, my video is not working. Okay, just a quick question. Just now, Venerable talked about the 5 degeneration. The 5, if not mistaken, is time, sentient beings, lifespan, action, and affliction. Can you elaborate more on that again? Sorry.
Elaborate more on what?
On the 5 degeneration.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a lot of information. So the 5 are time, beings, views, delusions, and lifespan. So those are the 5. So time means these times are not very spiritual. They're more materialistic. People are more caught up in, unwholesome states of mind and behavior and so on, and not so inclined towards spirituality. And then beings, beings, their minds are more disturbed, unpeaceful, unhappy. They're more selfish and so forth. And the third is views. People are holding views that are more confused and not correct, not in accordance with reality, with truth. And then fourth is delusions or mental afflictions, meaning those are stronger. Anger, attachment, jealousy, and so on. The afflictive emotions are stronger in this period of time. And the lifespan is shorter. The length of time human beings can live is shorter than other times. Because, Buddhism has this vast cosmology, and they talk about periods of time where human beings have bodies of light and they live very, very long lives, and their minds are much more pure and their behavior is more pure and so on. So compared with those times, the time we are in now is, more degenerate. I think they have this similar idea in Hinduism. They call it Kali Yuga. The term Kali Yuga. I think it's also a bad time, degenerate time. Someone else has raised their hand.
Yeah. Okay, Nguyen, you can unmute your mic and your video.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So you were encouraging us to practice Buddha's teaching, but nowadays there are many developed Buddha teaching. You know what I mean? So how can I find the original teaching? And in that case, if I encounter any teaching, how do I recognize that could be Buddha teaching? Because there are some teaching that I find out is a little bit conflict with another teaching that they both said that is from the Buddha teaching. So for the new one like me, sometimes I'm a little bit confused in some teaching.
You're saying that there are different kinds of teachings and some of them conflict with others. So you want to know how to tell which ones are the correct ones, the true ones? Is that your question?
Yes.
For
example, especially from when the Buddhism come to China. So the teaching, I think, is developed a little bit in some way. So when I look at them, for example, in Chinese Buddhism, they encourage us to chanting, to keep our mind stable or silent. But I think Buddha encourage us to use our mind to interpret our life to get enlightenment. So
yeah, this is a really important question, really good question. What I've learned, I've mainly just studied from Tibetan teachers, Tibetan masters, and they say that because the Buddha taught for 45 years, which is quite a long time, and he met lots of different kinds of people, and he had the ability to know what each person would need, what would be suitable for each person. So for some, he could teach very high teachings, like teachings on emptiness, selflessness, the true nature of things. And those people would be able to understand those teachings and use them and benefit from them, gain realizations. But if he had tried to teach those teachings to other people, they wouldn't have been able to understand them. And they might have even misunderstood them and become confused. So to those people, he would teach more simple, more basic things. So that's why when we look at the whole range of Buddha's teachings and all the different practices in Buddhism, we find quite a variety. They're not all the same. So my teachers explain the reason for that. It's like a doctor, you know, many people go to a doctor and each person has a different kind of illness or a different kind of ailment. The doctor doesn't give the same medicine to everybody. The doctor will give different medicines according to what illness the person has. And also according to the person's age. You know, you don't give the same medicine to a child that you would give to an adult. So a good doctor, a skillful doctor, is able to determine what's the most beneficial thing for each person. So they say the Buddha is similar, that he would teach according to the level of understanding and the level of ability, the needs of each person. So that's why we find such a wide range of different teachings and different practices. But it is important to learn what is genuine Buddhism, because there could be people who take a little bit of Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, and then mix it with other things and make it kind of distorted. So I don't know. There are different traditions as well. There's a Theravada tradition which relies on the Pali sutras in Pali language, and then in the Mahayana tradition, which developed in China and in Tibet. We mainly rely on sutras that were preserved in Sanskrit language, Mahayana sutras. And there are some differences between the Pali and the Sanskrit. So one thing you could do is try out different teachers or different traditions and just try to get in touch with your own intuition. You know, if you're in touch with what is true, what feels right for you, then you might be able to recognize, you know, when someone is teaching something that's genuine and true and beneficial. I mean, the Buddha himself said that in the Kalama Sutra. He was speaking to these people, the Kalama people, who had many teachers coming and teaching different things, and they said, how do we know what's right? And the Buddha said to them, you go by what feels right to you. In other words, what brings good, what brings benefit, follow that. And whatever brings suffering and problems, put that aside. So he was saying we need to use our own intelligence, our ability to discriminate and understand what's right and what's wrong. And yeah, it's a big job. But thank you so much for your interest in learning the Buddha's teachings and studying them and practicing them. I'm sure if you keep that attitude in your mind, you will find teachings that are right for you and beneficial for you. So I think we probably have to end here. And before we end, I do want to mention, because I noticed one of the questions, next week, His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be giving teachings at about the same time as this. But I decided to go ahead and give this talk as well, because both will be recorded. So the Dalai Lama's teachings will be recorded, and you can always watch those afterwards. My teachings will be recorded, so if you want to watch the Dalai Lama's teachings, you can watch this one afterwards. So whichever one you choose to watch, the other one will be available online, and you can watch it afterwards. But I thought, if we don't have this teaching next week, then it cuts down the number of classes we can have, and we'd have to rush more quickly through the text. Is that okay? That was kind of a compromise.
Remember, there's another Tenzin Pema has a raised question. Do you want to answer?
Ooh.
Tenzin Pema, do you want to
Sure.
answer another question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind going on if
Yeah.
you're okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Venerable, very much for your patience and kindness. Thank you for your teachings. My question is, we hear so much about lamas doing high practices, going off to caves. And as a layperson, it makes me wonder whether we will not be able to practice, or the practices we do are never going to be enough. So in a way, it is inspiring to see you all, but it's also kind of worrying to me that maybe I'll never be able to do enough. So could you please, guide me on this? Thank you so much.
So it sounds like you're comparing yourself to a lama who goes into a cave and stays there for many, many years and does full-time meditation. And then you feel, oh, I'm not good at all. I'm hopeless. I can't practice like that. So is it like that?
A bit, I think so. I mean, I do what I can.
Yeah, I think we all go through that phase. When I first started learning Buddhism, I kind of had this fantasy that I would be like Milarepa. I just go up into the mountains and sit in a cave and meditate and quickly reach enlightenment. And then when I did my first retreat, I realized, oh, wow, this is hard. So yeah, it's, I mean, the yogis, the meditators who are able to go into retreat and stay in a cave for long periods of time and meditate full time, they've probably been practicing for many lifetimes. So they already came into this life with a lot of imprints and a lot of practice already, in their minds. And so, in this lifetime, they don't have to learn so much, don't have to do so much, and they're able to really dedicate themselves to practice like that. So if we're not like that, I mean, I know I can't do that. I've tried and I realized, no, I can't. So in this lifetime, the way I see it is I'm learning as much and practicing as much and building up my merit and purifying and creating the causes that sometime in the next life or some other life in the future, I will be able to practice more and better. So maybe it's more realistic to think in that way. I do as much as I can now and aspire that in the future, some other life in the future, I will be able to practice more and gain the realizations like those great meditators. Otherwise, we can get very discouraged and maybe even beat ourselves up and think, oh, I'm so hopeless, I'm so bad. So that doesn't help at all. So it's very important to be in touch with yourself, what your abilities are, practice according to your abilities, and just wish and aspire and dedicate your merit that you'll be able to do more and more and more in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Venerable. Thank you.
Yeah, the Dalai Lama often talks about having a long-term view instead of thinking, oh, I have to reach enlightenment very quickly in this lifetime. Then we just get stressed out and it probably won't happen anyway. So he said, think long-term, many lives. And like Shantideva, this wonderful verse from Shantideva that the Dalai Lama always quotes, for as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, I too will remain in order to eliminate the suffering of the world. So he says, it's very good to think that way. I'm just going to keep practicing and keep going however long it takes. And just do the best that I can and be happy with that. Very, very important to rejoice in and appreciate whatever we are doing.